Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Very Cold Lasagna Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Lasagna, and this is episode number 238 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all those filthy casual sports takes, for all of you filthy casual sports fans. And in this episode, we're here to talk about another week that was in the NFL in this 2024 NFL season. And normally, I would say a week that will be, but there's no more week that will be in this regular season because it is all over. It is all over after this past week because we're moving on to the real season in this NFL season. And I keep saying season because, hey, that's the word of the day. And it's been the word for the last couple of months, season. So we're moving on to the real season at hand, and that is the playoffs. Playoffs? Yes, playoffs. So we have to wrap up the regular season in this episode, and that was the finale, week number 18. So before we do all that, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Make sure you follow Very Cold Lasagna at Very Cold Lasagna on Twitter and Instagram. And for all my audio listeners out there, make sure you keep listening to Very Cold Lasagna wherever you are, whether you're on the road or you're doing your business. Rate, review the show. And for people watching on YouTube, make sure you keep on watching. Smash the like button. Smash the subscribe button if you're not subscribed already, which you should, by the way. Leave your comments down below with your own takes on each and every topic on every episode, whatever the topic at hand that may be. That being week number 18 in the NFL season and how your team did or didn't do. And share this with your friends. Share this with a neighbor. Share this with your stranger. Share this with your coworkers, whether it's at work or school. Share the good, the bad, the ugly about this podcast entitled Very Cold Lasagna. And just a few announcements before we get started. I'll be doing two episodes relatively soon here on the podcast. One about my San Francisco 49ers and just doing one final recap on their very disappointing 2024 season. And, you know, putting a bow, a reluctant and yet relieving bow on their campaign. So we'll be wrapping up their season. But, of course, the talk about the 49ers is not done there. And then, of course, we'll be doing our filthy casual preview to the upcoming playoffs that will be starting relatively soon. And then on the YouTube channel, we'll be, you know what? We'll do it. We'll talk about the Monday Night Raw premiere on Netflix. I decided to check up on it. And I have a lot of things to say about it. And whether it's nice things, bad things, we're going to talk about it over on the YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe if you're not subscribed already on Very Cold Lasagna. I may, for all my audio listeners out there, upload it as a little extra for you all. But for all my YouTube watchers out there and for all my audio listeners out there, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so we can continue to grow this little community here on Very Cold Lasagna. That being said, let's get into the topic at hand, and that is the week that was, and, well, the week that was, because there's no longer a week that will be here on Very Cold Lasagna's NFL coverage for the 2024 NFL season. Week number 18, the finale of this regular season. So, the playoff picture going into this past week, it's still a lot to be decided, where it had to do with seeding or the last set of playoff spots. They were still to be determined. So, that being said, let's look at the playoff picture going into this past week. So we already knew who was in. That being the Bills, the Chiefs, the Lions, the Eagles, the Steelers, the Texans, the Vikings, the Ravens, the Packers, the Commanders, and the LA Rams. So, who's ready for that January Cancun cruise meanwhile? You had the Giants, the Raiders, the Jaguars, the Patriots, the Jets, the Browns, the Titans, the Panthers, the Bears, the Saints, the Cardinals, my 49ers, the Colts, and the Seahawks. So, plenty of stake still with both the clinched teams because they're still deciding on seeding and a select few teams that were still fighting for both a division title and for the last remaining playoff spots. in the wild card. So let's talk about this final weekly slate in the NFL season. And that started with a doubleheader over on ESPN, as it consisted of the AFC North, with the Baltimore Ravens hosting the Cleveland Browns. How did they get the Cleveland Browns on ESPN with this kind of record, with this select slate of quarterbacks? I don't know. But they were trying out there Bailey Zappi, and oh boy. You get what you get, I guess, with what the NFL was offering to them. But the Baltimore Ravens easily took care of the Cleveland skid marks, 35-10 in this one. But the Ravens, sure, they dominated in this game. Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, each scored 2 touchdowns apiece. But the win and clinching the AFC North, it came at a price. It came at a price of this one because Zay Flowers, he went down with, I believe, was a knee sprain in this one. That's what they were reporting it. That's what I saw last time I checked the social media. But anyway, in all seriousness though, it says it was not a serious injury, which is good news for the Ravens, but it's looking like he's not going to be able to play. He has a very low chance of playing in the Ravens' first round game against, well, we'll save that for later on who the Ravens' first round opponent will be. But yeah, for the Ravens' first round game, which is relatively soon, Zay Flowers have a relatively low chance of playing, but hopefully they'll get him back. The good news though is he should be fine, like at least for hopefully the Ravens playoff run. So it's not severe, at least for the Browns. Looking at the bright side of things, well, you can finally focus on getting a quarterback to hopefully replace Deshaun Watson in his shitty ass contract, and the one that Jimmy Haslam for some reason decided to go and get many moons ago. It feels like an eternity, huh? But oh boy, that trade is really starting to look so bad, especially with the news of Deshaun Watson and his Achilles rehab. The news of that being delayed. Yeah, it's looking real bad for the skid marks right now. Meanwhile, down in Pittsburgh, they hosted the Steelers hosted the Cincinnati Bengals in what was a must-win game for the Bengals. And the Bengals took control of this one late. Trey Henderson had a big night, sacking Russell Wilson, had 3.5 sacks in this one. And they held off a late Steelers rally as they keep their season hopes alive for one more day at least, beating them 19-17. And, for as pessimistic as I was on the Cincinnati Bengals, they're 4-8 at one point, but they've won 5 straight, including this one. So credit to them for keeping their hopes alive. But unfortunately, when you look back at their season, sure, they've got red hot performances in that 5-game winning streak from Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, and a defense that it's been tacky during that stretch, but they've gotten, I'd say, slightly decent. But you just look at the games that they lost. They lost one too many important games. And also look at, the week 1 loss to the Patriots. Of all teams, the rebuilding New England Patriots. They didn't even start Drake May yet. You lost that game to the Patriots. And now then you had to depend on a miracle from the mile high. You had to rely on a splash from Miami in the gang green side of New York for the Bengals to hopefully make a playoff appearance. So you're basically riding on that. Meanwhile, if you're the Steelers, oh boy, going into what's going to be a 3-match against the Baltimore Ravens coming up soon. This is not the kind of performance you want to have on offense. I mean, sure, they caught up against Cincinnati. They had a chance to win this game and send the Bengals packing very, very early. But they didn't show up. They had chemistry issues all night long, especially from one George Pickens. Russell Wilson targeted him 6 times, but Pickens dropped that ball all but one time. And then they were having butterfingers, not just from George Pickens, but from Pat Freiermuth too. dropping a critical fourth down catch that sealed the win for Cincinnati. And then you had Russell Wilson making this odd decision to not throw the ball away, like a couple plays earlier before that, not throwing the ball away on a key down that he was scrambling on the pocket for, trying to get the first down, and instead, rather than running out of bounds too, he took a hit inbounds that kept the clock running. They were trying to preserve that timeout, but then on the very next play, he got sacked, and Mike Tomlin was forced to call his last timeout. Not exactly good clock management, not exactly good decision making from Russell Wilson. And you look at the Steelers team, they're pretty ice cold right now. So looking at the Sunday slate of games, starting with the early morning portion, as the Carolina Panthers took on the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons were in must-win situation. They really need to win this one and hope for a miracle from the New Orleans Saints down in Tampa. But even if they had won this one, it wasn't going to happen because Miles Sanders, he pushed the Falcons to the limit in overtime, and well, he actually got the win for Carolina, getting a goal line run in the extra period, making the Falcons already bad news day an even worse one as the Panthers beat the Falcons 44-38. Yeah, the Panthers ending their season on a high note, especially from Bryce Young, having this really nice performance, rebounding from last week in Tampa. Having this really nice performance in Atlanta, spoiling Atlanta's end to their season while giving the Panthers a pretty optimistic look going to the offseason. And also, once again, giving the Panthers higher-ups a lot of reconsidering this offseason about him. So the next thing, if you're the Carolina Panthers, for Bryce Young, Dave Canales, and that front office, consider building around Bryce Young. Of course, you want to bring in a quality backup just in the case of emergency break glass situation that Young goes back to form, like the early season form. You want to assure, this positive, end to the season, like this stretch, you can follow up on that. You got to build around Bryce Young. You got to give him a proper supporting cast to ensure that you can follow up on this encouraging second half next fall. Meanwhile, for the Falcons, you almost won this game. You could have won this game because Michael Penix, he played well in this finale, but you can only ask him to do so much because his defense played like dog dookie water. They could not stop Bryce Young in this offense. And even if the Falcons had won and the Saints had done their end of the deal down in Tampa Bay, the Falcons would still been a first-round exit at home because their defense was getting lit up by Bryce Young and, whatever supporting cast he had down in Carolina. Still, their defense was getting lit up on nearly every possession. And that's something Raheem Morris really needs to fix this offseason. Sure, they're going to have to eat a dead cap hit because of Kirk Cousins' shitty deal. But, at least when you look at how Michael Penix performed in these last 3 games that he started, the Falcons should feel somewhat positive about how he did going to next season. But, of course, we've seen this before with Atlanta. 3 games is a very small sample size when it comes to, these quarterbacks. You don't know how it's going to translate going to next season, but hopefully it can be something positive for them next year. Meanwhile, down in Dallas, the Commanders took on the Cowboys, and Atlanta was Washington. They were initially playing their starters, but then they started pulling them out, especially Jane Daniels. They put in Marcus Mariota, and the Commanders were still playing for something here, mainly the 6th seed, and they almost lost it. But Marcus Mariota threw a touchdown to Terry McLaurin with 3 seconds left to secure that number 6 seed for the Commanders, and a trip awaits to Tampa to face a certain somebody as they beat the Cowboys 23-19. And when you look at how the Commanders played, you really didn't get much out of the normal production on offense. Marcus Mariota, sure, he led the comeback, but it's really the little concern on defense because you can only ask Jane Daniels to do so much. But when you see that defense getting lit up by a Trey Lance led offense, who again, Trey Lance didn't see a whole lot of action until this past week. That Commanders defense were suddenly given a challenge, and that's concerning. And they were very fortunate that Marcus Mariota was able to save their ass at the last moment. But yeah, the playoffs are a much different animal. And when they face Baker Mayfield, oh boy, and Jane Daniels suddenly is not able to save them. Yeah, that's a first round exit waiting to happen. Meanwhile, as the Cowboys move on to their offseason, they've lost at their 7-10. Disappointing season after they decided to go. They're going to go all in on this season. Does Jerry Jones have the guts to move on from Mike McCarthy? Now, necessarily, he doesn't have to fire him because his contract technically expires very soon. But if you're Jerry Jones and his stubborn butt, does he really have the grapefruits to, despite, 3 unceremonious playoff exits and this disappointing season, does he have the grapefruits to move on from Mike McCarthy for a better option out there? And there's certainly a couple of better options out there that he could consider. So speaking of the Commanders, because not only were they going for the 6th seed, which they did get, the Packers were also going for the 6th seed. But unfortunately, they didn't get the 6th seed because against the Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams helped the Bears overcome a lost fumble because of their own stupidity. But they overcame that said stupidity to get Cairo Santos into range for a game-winning field goal and snap their 10-game losing skid to end their season on a high note, upsetting the Packers 24-22. And at least when you're looking at it from the Bears, you can hopefully use this end to the year and Caleb Williams leading a game-winning drive in Lambeau to hopefully use that as motivation going into next year and hopefully get themselves, the damn McCaskies, to get themselves the right coach. Get an offensive-minded head coach that can, that can really coach up Caleb Williams and this offense. Get the right pieces around him. And, of course, get the right defensive coordinator to coach up this defense. Meanwhile, from the Packers, oh, man. Not the kind of losses that you want to have. Not the kind of losses you want to have going to the playoffs. You lose to the Vikings in bad fashion. Sure, you almost came back, but before that, didn't look good. And then in this game against Chicago, you lose Jordan Love and Christian Watson to injury. Now, Jordan Love, he suffered an elbow injury, but he said he should be fine for the playoffs. But Christian Watson came away less than safe. It's very severe. If we're being very specific, it's a torn ACL. Oh boy. That's a major blow to the Packers offense. Now, they have deep young receiver depth. But to hear that, to have that going into a road playoff game, especially when Jordan Love's less than 50%, and you trot out Christian Watson, who was not really healthy going into this game, it's not a good look for Matt LaFleur, man. Really not. So, the Packers are going to be kicking rocks going into Philadelphia. Meanwhile, for the Indianapolis Colts and the Jacksonville Jaguars, playing in this exhibition game, Joe Flacco and Jonathan Taylor, they came clutch for the Colts to set up Matt Gay's go-ahead field goal in the extra period, while preventing the Jaguars from doing anything on their turn to try and beat them. The Colts went on to beat the Jaguars 26-23 in overtime. And for the Colts, the Jim Irsay, the owner for the Colts, they decided to keep the jobs of Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, for now at least. But, he really needs to fix this year's biggest issues this offseason. Steichen, he already fired defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. So, yeah, he needs to find a defensive coordinator that can coach up this defense that really struggled in the secondary, and also gain some help with said secondary. More importantly, like, we still don't know whether Anthony Richardson can be that franchise quarterback. He was benched for 2 games for a bad attitude, I guess. And then he was lost for the last few games of the season because of back spasms. So, plenty of questions regarding this Colts team and apparently the culture of this team. But hey, you're getting a Royal Rumble in a couple weeks, right? That's what matters, doesn't it? So you're getting Royal Rumble, despite Pat McAfee roasting your butts. Meanwhile, for the all elite Jaguars, for what it's worth, they decided to fire Doug Peterson at head coach, but for whatever reason, they keep Trent Baalke at GM. Why? I mean, it's not ideal. This is not unheard of, because this is what Jed York did almost a decade ago, when he fired Jim Tomsula, and yet he kept Trent Baalke. So isn't not the first time I've heard of an owner doing this when it came to Trent Baalke. But like, even with before all the injuries, when this season went off the rails for the Jaguars, it's not like this team was lighting the world up on fire before many of their key players went down, including Trevor Lawrence. Like, they were severely underperforming. Doug Peterson wasn't having this team prepared like most weeks before all the injuries. So yeah, he unfortunately had to go. So they only had one good season in 2022, like 2 years ago. And it's unfortunate. So hopefully they get the right coach. Meanwhile, down in New England, the Patriots hosted the Buffalo Bills, and you had this practice squad member, Joe Milton, who came out of nowhere. And he lit up the Bills' B squad defense, having 2 total touchdowns for the day to give the Patriots a win, 23-16 over the B squad Bills. And it really made this was like funny, man. Like 2 years ago, we had a certain incident with the Houston Texans. Like, they were in possession of the number 1 overall pick. And 2 years later, Gerard Mayo pulled a Lovie Smith and gave the Kraft family a big fuck you on the way out the door. Why do I say a big fuck you? Because just like Lovie 2 years ago, Mayo was either told beforehand he was getting canned or he knew he was getting fired. So he pulled Drake May like after the first series of the game, and he decided to bring in this practice squad guy, Joe Milton, who he had a good game against his B squad Bills, and Joe Milton won the game. He won the game. Gerard Mayo was like, "Hey, you're gonna fire my ass? Well, then fuck your first overall pick, Hal. Like, you can go rot in hell with that 4th overall pick." It's like, oh boy, the Patriots are so petty. But yeah, Gerard Mayo, sure, he's petty too, but it's a justified petty. Gerard Mayo is a justified heel in wrestling terms. But anyway, in all seriousness though, had the Patriots, actually did their job, had Gerard Mayo, embraced the tank, even if he knew he was going to get fired, they could have gotten even more with the number 1 overall pick. They couldn't have gotten, the haul for a quarterback needy team. Like, let's say with the Titans, or from the Skid Marks, or even the Giants. I mean, they still should be able to get what they want at number 4, like a receiver, for example, like that Travis Hunter guy. But I'm just saying, they could have gotten even more had the Crafts shut up. Had the Crafts just shut up and, or not, at least not imply that they're going to fire his ass immediately after the game. Oof and oof. Meanwhile, for the Philadelphia Eagles, they took on the New York Giants. This B squad Eagles, despite not having Jalen Hurts or most of the starters out there, Tanner McKee still managed to lead the Eagles to victory with 2 touchdowns. And Sidney Brown, the corner, he got a late interception on Drew Lock as the Eagles got a pre-playoff win over the Giants, 20-13. So yeah, not even this hapless Giants team can beat the big squad Eagles. Yeah. But if you're the Eagles, though, going into this playoff game against the Packers next week, you just have to hope that Jalen Hurts is ready to go. He can be cleared from concussion protocol. But I mean, I'm just saying they can win okay with a Kenny Pickett or a Tanner McKee, but the playoffs are a different environment. You want to have Jalen Hurts like with all the starters out there. Meanwhile, for the Giants, they decided to keep Joe Shozen, the GM, Brian Dable, the head coach. For whatever reason, John Mara wants. I don't know why, because they're questionable decisions like an offseason ago. They decided to keep Daniel Jones, re-sign him over Saquon Barkley. They gave him the franchise tag, and then before this season, Saquon Barkley leaves in free agency, goes to the Philadelphia Eagles, and then what happens to Daniel Jones? Underperforms again, and then he eventually gets benched, and then they eventually release Daniel Jones. Oof. So, yeah, this duo better find the right quarterback. They better give that quarterback the proper supporting cast this offseason. Now, whether they have the money, whether they have the picks to do that, that's another question. Because even with those things, even with that supply, if they don't do it, then John Mara is going to regret not firing them now, sooner rather than later. Meanwhile, down in Tampa Bay, the Bucs took on the New Orleans Saints. The Bucs scored 14 unanswered points in the fourth quarter and stopped the Saints late in the 2-minute drill to secure the NFC South, 27-19. Again, had they even lost, because both Atlanta lost as well and Tampa Bay lost, I believe. I think Atlanta would have secured it. I don't know. No, Tampa still would have secured it. The NFC South anyway. But still, the Bucs get the win, 27-19 over the Saints. But yeah, this kind of win, yeah, that's not going to do against the Commanders for as bad as the Commanders' defense is. Like, the Bucs are going to be one and done if they fall asleep like they did against the Saints for 3 quarters. 3 quarters. So they better use this game as a wake-up call. Meanwhile, for the Saints, like, you're finally in the offseason. The season of torture is over. Hopefully, this offseason, this front office, this ownership can finally use it to offload the aging players, bring in some youth, get some full change in. Once they get the right coach in, once they get settled in on their head coach, inject some youth into this team. Get rid of some of the aging players on this team. Meanwhile, down in Tennessee, the Houston Texans took on the Tennessee Titans. Derek Barnett, he got a scoop and score touchdown in the fourth quarter to put the cherry topper for this B squad Texans going to the playoffs, beating the Titans 23-14. So at least if you're the Titans, after enduring a season of quarterback torture that had Will Levis and Mason Rudolph leading the helm, the Titans and their fan base, they can finally say it's over. But more importantly, even better, they can finally say, yes, we can finally rejoice because they're on the clock with the first overall pick in April's NFL draft. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, because the Patriots decided to, oh no, not the Patriots, Gerard Mayo decided to say, fuck your number 1 overall pick to the Patriots. And the Titans were gifted a gift. And that gift was the first overall pick. So Brian Callahan and company, they're going to be looking real hard at who's going to be the best quarterback in this draft, but they're also probably going to scout for a veteran in free agency. But regardless, where it's a veteran or a rookie, probably both, ideally, yeah, they're going to have a new quarterback next year. So a new era is going to be upon them in Tennessee. Look at the late afternoon slate of games. In the desert, we had the Cardinals taking on the 49ers. Kyler Murray rattled off 4 touchdowns on San Francisco as the Cardinals dropped the 40 bomb to end their season on a high note, beating San Francisco 47-24. Honestly, like I said in my dedicated review to the 49ers, not much was really learned. Nothing much new, at least. about either team going into the offseason. Like, basically, the potential with Murray and Harrison Jr., like, it had flashes in this game. And, Trey McBride, Pro Bowler, but this Cardinals team was just too inconsistent. The 49ers, they had one too many problems on the field and off of it, where this loss was just a whole summary. It was just a whole exclamation point of this season. Like, allowing 40 plus points. Oh man. Like, they better resolve the issues this offseason. Meanwhile, in the Mile High, the Broncos blanked on the Chiefs B squad to collect the AFC's last playoff spot and a date in Buffalo, shutting out the Chiefs 38-0 and eliminating both the Bengals and the Dolphins from playoff contention. So, congratulations to Denver, finally ending 8 years of a playoff drought since they won their Super Bowl in 2015. And yeah, even if their celebration ends in a week to the hands of Josh Allen, hey, consider where you were a year ago. Consider all the memes of Patrick Starr roasting Russell Wilson, and then all the memes of, the Broncos releasing Russell Wilson with that high dead cap charge. I was one of those people. But here you are now with the new quarterback that's performing above expectations. This team performing above expectations. So even if they lose next week to Josh Allen, the Bills, which is expected, the future should look pretty bright in the Mile High. Meanwhile, down in LA, the Rams side of LA, the Seahawks took on the LA Rams. Geno Smith's late touchdown to Noah Fant spoiled the Rams' chance at a better playoff matchup as Seattle ended their season on a high note, 30-25. When you look at the Seahawks, sure, they're 10-7, but they barely missed out on the playoffs because of a tiebreaker with the Rams. So at least they end their season on a positive note and played spoiler to the Rams' playoff season. But they got an important decision to make with Geno Smith because his contract next season gets pretty costly. They can release him to save $25 million, but they got to make sure they have a better quarterback option in mind. Meanwhile, for the Rams, it was an interesting decision to rest their starters this week with Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua not playing this game. Jimmy G played in this one. So that sounded fine in theory, but seeding was still at play for Sean McVay and his squad, and that move proved to be costly for them. And rather than facing Jane Daniels and the Commanders in this game, now he'll have to play whoever loses that winner-take-all game on Sunday night. And whoever loses that said game is going to probably come into SoFi pretty pissed off. And considering what happened in that Sunday night game, which we'll talk about in a bit, yeah, they're going to be really pissed off. Meanwhile, in the host site of WrestleMania, coming up relatively soon, in about 3 months, the Chargers put on a WrestleMania clinic on the Las Vegas Raiders as Justin Herbert and the Chargers torched the Raiders with a second half beating to pull away in this playoff tune-up for them, move up to the 5 seed, 34-20. And yeah, I'd say it's a solid tune-up for the Chargers. Both sides of the ball did their job, and yeah, now a date with Houston awaits for them. Meanwhile, for the Raiders, now an interesting offseason begins for them. And when I say interesting, because Antonio Pierce spoke with the media on Monday. No news of him getting fired yet. And you just have to wonder, is Mark Davis really wanting to stick with Antonio Pierce, despite previously mixed reports of him supporting Antonio, and then other things like the players not really expressing that same support? You have to wonder if a new head coach is on the horizon, especially now that minority owner Tom Brady could be involved in that process. So that's something that should be on the watch in the next couple days and weeks. What's also be on the horizon is a new quarterback search. But that could be a real challenge because, well, the Raiders decided to fuck that up and win 2 games rather than, lose them all and now it affects their draft position. Yeah, good going on that one. Meanwhile, down in the Yankee side of the New York, I'm clogged up. In the gangrene side of New York, anyway, the New York Jets took on the Miami Dolphins, and Aaron Rodgers threw 4 touchdowns in this one, in what was, I'd say, a kind of Aaron Rodgers-esque performance. And one of those touchdowns being his 500th touchdown of his career. And they played spoiler to the Dolphins and to their season as the Jets beat the Dolphins 32-20. At least, if you're looking at it from both sides, the Aaron Rodgers error, sure, it's over, but at least it ended on a high note. So now, both sides can move on. They can move on, and it's for the best. Now, whether Aaron Rodgers plays for another team next year is another question. But when you look back at these last 2 years for the Jets, it was painful. It was painful and essentially a waste of time and a waste of resources for gangrene. Meanwhile, for the Miami Dolphins, I mean, they tried their best. They really tried their best to try and get into the playoffs, backdoor their way into the playoffs. But, like, you look at that stretch without Tua early in the season, and it was rough. It's like it showed that they didn't really have a backup plan. And if they want to be competitive with or without Tua next year, they need better backup plans. Like Skylar Thompson, Tim Boyle, Tyler Huntley, can't have that. So GM Chris Greer is going to need big pressing options. He has to look at all options this offseason. Then we had the Sunday Night Football game that everyone thought was going to be one of the biggest, the best Sunday Night Football games of the year. But boy, did that quickly turn into a blowout. Because Jahmyr Gibbs said, what big Sunday Night Football game? Because he had a 4-touchdown torching of the Minnesota Vikings to give the Lions an earned NFC North and an earned bye week in the NFC playoffs, as the Lions get the top seed in the playoffs in this winner-take-all beatdown of the Vikings, 31-9. And if you look at the Minnesota Vikings, oh boy, these issues that are popping up, especially in the red zone, not looking good at this particular time. Like, I really didn't understand, like, at this time, like, why did Sam Darnold in the offense have, like, they had 4 cracks at the end zone, yet they only came away with 3 points in the red area. Why exactly was that? Because Kevin O'Connell decided to have his quarterback throw it. They called a bunch of passing plays rather than having Aaron Jones or Cam Akers try to run the ball. And yeah, sure, it didn't work, but at least continue to try it like half of the time. Not like, oh, run it once and then throw it a bunch of times and then go for it on 4th down. No, kick the field goal, which they'd eventually do on this 3rd try. But it cost his team valuable points. So yeah, those red zone issues, especially with Darnold facing heavy pressure, probably the most pressure he's faced in his career. Yeah, that's something that the Vikings can't have, and that's something that the Rams now have on tape. So going into a Monday night wildcard game, that's not looking good for the Vikings. But what's good for the Lions is that defense. That defense that had been so beaten up by injuries in the last month or two. This is a game that they really stepped up. Like, that front 7 came through to make Darnold's life a living hell. And the secondary that's been also ravaged, it shut down all of his receiving options in the red zone. Like, Justin Jefferson locked up. Jordan Addison also locked up. Sure, they lost Terry Arnold to a foot injury, but still managed to lock them all down. So now they get this bye week, a much needed bye week, to buy more time, get some of their key players back on defense, and we'll see where they go from there in the divisional. So that was the week that was for week number 18. And let's pass out some awards, shall we? My 3 final stars of the week in the week that was and will be here on Very Cold Lasagna in the 2024 regular season. Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back for the Lions, 23 carries, 139 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He also had 5 catches, 31 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Big game for Gibbs in that winner-take-all matchup. And then Bryce Young for the Panthers, in that Week 18 game against the Falcons, he went off as well. 25 for 34, 251 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and also having 2 rushing touchdowns on 24 yards. And then Commanders receiver Terry McLaurin, the stat sheet, yeah, not really fancy, but the performance says otherwise. 8 catches, 62 yards, and the game-winning touchdown for Marcus Mariota to give the Commanders the 6th seed. So those were your stars of week number 18. If you have 3 different stars in mind, let me know in the comments below on YouTube or slide into the DMs at Very Cold Lasagna. And let me know how your team did or didn't do in this final week of the regular season. So let me know your takes on this final week in the 2024 campaign. So before we wrap up this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, I just want to give a debrief. I just want to put a bow on this 2024 regular season before we head into the playoffs. This season, it brought out some very bright stars, especially the rookie class. Like Drake May, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, Caleb Williams. Like, I'd say the rookie class did pretty well this season. Even if some, like a few of those rookies, like Caleb, they were on crappy teams. So, but at least on the crappy teams, hopefully they will build around someone like Caleb this offseason. And the contending teams did as expected as they usually do, like the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bills, and so on. However, when you look at the middle portion of the year, especially when you listen to me on Very Cold Lasagna, admittedly, it dragged. It really dragged with all the blowouts. Like, there were just one too many blowouts. There wasn't really anything to take away from, like nothing new, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I really didn't like, like mid-October to like the October to like the end of November. There's really nothing going on during those months. Of course, like I said, the most wonderful time of the NFL season is either December, where it really clamps down, and of course the playoffs. And then also not helping, per usual, is the stupid ref ball impacting a lot of games and influencing the end of games, like we saw with, I'd say week 2 with Cincinnati and Kansas City with that stupid pass interference. And there was a lot of season-ending injuries to what felt like every team. Like almost every team had a single season-ending injury. Yeah. Like, there were a lot of injuries than usual this season. Nonetheless, it was still a solid regular season, especially the last month of it. But, yeah, the play has been kind of down, to be honest with you. So let's pass out some awards for the regular season. With the MVP, some of you may call this controversial if you happen to come along this little podcast. My regular season MVP is Josh Allen. So why do I think it's Josh Allen? Well, even without a single true top weapon in this offense. Now, keep in mind, no Stephon Diggs anymore. No, what was that receiver? He pretty much lost all of his top receiving options in the offseason. But when you look at how Josh Allen, this past year, everyone said he's going to have a regression year because he basically has nobody on offense. He also lost a couple key pieces on defense because of the salary cap. But Josh Allen has proven doubters wrong this season because he, once again, made something out of nothing. And that connection, he's proven that connection with Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper. They added those pieces around him, and that's why the Bills are a very serious threat in the AFC. And then the best team, the Detroit Lions. Despite the injuries on defense, they've won 15 games because of a habanero hot offense that has really made defenses look silly all season. And going back to that defense, they just had a really good performance despite those injuries against another hot team in the Minnesota Vikings to clinch the division and to clinch the top seed in the NFC. The worst team. Some will say it's the skid marks of Cleveland. Some will say it's the Tennessee Titans. Some will say it's some other team that was the worst of them all. But my worst team this season was the New York Giants. The New York Giants, it's because of how poor they played all year and how they handled the Daniel Jones situation during the bye week. Like, after they went to Germany, they bench him for Tommy DeVito. But then when they come back from the bye week, they have him play as scout safety. Like, they demoted him to the third string backup behind Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito. But then you use him as the scout. He's playing scout safety, not even quarterback, scout safety. Like, and that leaks out. And now both of them just all of a sudden just mutually decide that, hey, I think it's best that we both part ways. Wow. That was just horrible management by the Giants. So, yeah, they deserve to lose all but one of their remaining games because of that. And we deserve to lose out on the first overall pick for stupidly deciding to eliminate the Colts for playoff contention, even though they deserve that too. The Colts. So the Giants, because of how poor they played all year with and without Daniel Jones, are the worst team in the NFL this year. Most underrated, the Denver Broncos. Like, again, I point back to the hefty release tag of Russell Wilson, but they also overcame the slow start on offense, and Sean Payton eventually took the training wheels off of Bo Nix, and slowly but surely, Nix looked a lot more comfortable, and in turn, the offense became a more explosive force, despite not really having a number 2 receiver alongside Cortland Sutton. Marvin Mims, possibly. There's still a couple more pieces from truly competing in the division. Sure, they have a strong defense, but I feel like they've slightly regressed a little bit. But yeah, they came further along than preseason expectations. Most disappointing, last but not least, the New York Jets, the other New York team. Because despite Aaron Rodgers' return from a torn Achilles, a lot of people expected them to compete with the Buffalo Bills for, at minimum, the division. Or at minimum, at least, make the playoffs. But somehow, this team was worse with him in the lineup. Like, Rodgers, I believe, played all the games this year as quarterback, and he looked like a mirror image of his past self, despite flashes here and there. The defense took a major step back, especially after Woody Johnson inexplicably fired Robert Saleh after week 5, and then he went out to fire the general manager later on in the season. And then they traded for Devontae Adams, but that didn't make much of a difference until it was way too late. And now, again, instead of playoff hopes at minimum, these Jets went 5-12, fired both their head coach and general manager, and now Rodgers is very likely going to part ways with the New York Jets after just one fully active season, which was this one. What a waste of active resources by the Jets to go out and get Aaron Rodgers for a desperate short-term attempt at a Super Bowl. Ridiculous, man. Ridiculous. Now the Jets basically have to start over from scratch again after the failed Sam Darnold, Zach Wilson attempts to be a franchise quarterback. He went out to get a short-term thing with Aaron Rodgers, and that was a failure. That was a failure. So those are my regular season awards for the NFL. What was your own NFL regular season awards for this season? Let me know in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about it. And yeah, another regular season is in the books. And this is my first time since almost 3 years since we kind of covered it here for both the video and the audio people here on Very Cold Lasagna. And I gotta say, it's good to bring everybody back in for when it comes to the NFL coverage. And I gotta say, there were some ups and certainly a lot of downs. But nonetheless, it was nice to talk about the world of the NFL on the weekly for both my YouTube people and for my audio people out there once again. And we're certainly going to get back on it when the playoffs roll around relatively soon. Playoffs? Yes, playoffs. So we'll be doing that relatively soon with the Filthy Casual preview to NFL Super Wildcard Weekend. And again, it's coming relatively soon. But for now, we put a bow on this 2024 NFL regular season. as Week 18 is officially done with. And so is this 2024 NFL regular season. So thank you for tuning in to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I have been your host, Dylan Lasagna. This was episode 238 of this icy yet spicy sports podcast. And until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. Until I see ya, when I see ya in the next episode, peace out.